even before 1594. We'll start with with Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, and we have of course, in the first day, vayivra Elokim et haaretz. Excuse me. Vayomer Elokim yihi or, vayihi or, and then we have vayi erev, vayi boker, yom echad. And of course, the question which is already discussed in the Rishonim is what is exactly being created here? Because we know, of course, that only on the fourth day are we going to have the sun, the moon, the stars being introduced, and what is exactly time that is being discussed in this point? The Ramban in source number 2 here. נתן אתה יכול לעזור לי ופשוט להבליט את המקורות כשאנחנו מגיעים להם. So the Ramban in number 2, so the Ramban speaks about ויקרא אלוקים לאור יום, יאמר כי נברא הזמן ועשה מידת יום ומידת לילה. So basically, לא ב' מספר 2.
You're going the wrong way. Right there. Stop.
There you go. Mispar 2. Sham. So the Ramban says, "Vayikra Elokim la'or yom, yomar ki nivra hazman v'asa midat yom midat laila." So basically, the notion what was created on the first day was time was created. Now, of course, this is even perhaps, and I ever mistake me for physicist, but of course, if you're discussing after the theory of relativity, time continuum, that we view time as being a dimension which is impacted by motion, impacted by other of the universe, to the extent that those, and even Einstein was one of them, that viewed to a certain extent from our perspective of time as being an illusion. The idea that God is for all of the dimensions, right? God is a outside of our per side of all of our dimensions, and so one of those dimensions that he is outside of is the dimension of time. So what is being created when we speak of universe, or if you prefer, a physical multiverse. So this is now being what is being presented here is the question of time, and that's the Or Yom and the Choshech Laila. So this is what is being created. The Rabbeinu Bachai is a slightly later commentator on Chumash, also working off of the Ramban. So he feels that time needs to have some kind of, and perhaps it does from our perspective, needs to have some, there has to be an entity not by which that time is necessarily being recorded, but which is creating the time. So he, in number 3, so he speaks of how, again, before we talk of day 4, when we're going to have the sun and the moon to delineate time from a terrestrial perspective, from the way that we view things here on Earth. So he speaks of it, it's in the end of the second line in number 3, El klape hagalgal, shehu chozer umitgalgel bo, ki chol chelak michelkei harakiach, shu oleh hulo boker, shokea hulo erev. So he speaks of working with medieval cosmology. So he speaks of the spheres. That's what the Galgalim are, and that since the already the spheres were in motion. Whether or not there is a sun, whether or not there is a moon, whether or not that sun or moon exists, but they are just simply not perceptible to the observer from Earth. However you want to understand what happened on the fourth day, but the universe, and that's the spheres, that's the Galgal, already is in motion, and because of that, there is time. The Rambam in Sefer in Moreh Nevuchim here in number 4. So the Rambam understood time to be something which is dependent on motion. And again, I wouldn't claim that the Rambam has foreseen Einsteinian physics, but basically this idea, time depends on, to take a look at the second, we'll read all 4 lines. He then produced from nothing, the Rambam speaking about what happened on the first day, all existing things such as they are by his will and desire. Even time itself is among the things created, for time depends on motion, that is, on an accident in things which move. When the Rambam speaks of accidents here, he's referring to Aristotelian accidents, which mean that they are properties of objects which are not innate to the object itself. So if I speak about, let's say, the shirt that I'm wearing, so the shirt is a thing, it's an object from the perspective of Aristotle, but the blueness of my shirt is that quality of blue, that is what he would refer to as an accident. Similarly, time is an accident that is, and motion itself of the, so it's an accident of an accident, if you will. It's a feature, what we might call a feature of objects, of mass, and the things upon whose motion time depends themselves created being, passed from non-existence. So this is a general, I guess you could call it an introduction to the topic of the show. The idea of time is already very much obviously it's a feature of existence, a feature of our collective existence, everything else in the universe, but it's also something which the Torah, in effect, is speaking about. The question now becomes, how do we measure that time? How are we able to gauge it from how long? Here the Torah itself, but in day 4, gives us the beginning of it, and that is here in back to source number 1 in the Psukim, that the Torah tells us what the purpose of the sun and the moon is. And it's interesting that the Torah doesn't simply refer to the lights in the sky, the Ma'or Hagadol and the Ma'or Katan, to refer to them from a cosmological perspective, which it does in Pasuk Tet Zayin, the sun to rule the day sky and the moon to rule the night sky along with the stars. Great, that's what we would expect. But then the Torah adds a pasuk actually that had preceded it, that why did God create them? So God created it for what we would expect, but also pasuk Yudalid, v'hayu la'otot u'l'moadim u'l'yamim v'shanim. So these stellar objects are going to be used as means of delineating time. And that is what is referred to, Moadim, Yamim, Vishanim. So here we have the practical aspect, if you will, from the perspective, the human perspective, because of course, only man, at least in terms of the creatures that were created by God, only man measures time. No other no other being, to the best of our knowledge, has a sense of time and time passing. And God Himself, if you will, lives beyond time. Again, whatever lives means in terms of the Ribono Shel Olam, but the exists beyond time, so or outside of time. So time and the measurement of time only has importance from the perspective of man, and so the sun, moon here on Earth. So this is how we're going to be able to measure time with the and of course our calendar, which is a joint solar and lunar calendar, is built upon these two different aspects, which are not necessarily connected. Whereas the months are delineated solely by the moon. There's no such thing as a solar month, and even the term, whether it's in Hebrew chodesh, because it's renewing itself, yareach, which is of course the moon itself. The word month from moon, everything is referring to the lunar cycle. When it comes, of course, to the years, the moon doesn't have any role to play in that either. But in terms of the seasons and in terms of the equinox and the like, so that is solely dependent upon the Earth's revolution around and rotation around the revolution around the sun, and the rotation on the Earth's axis in terms of days. So that is all things that occur on the fourth day, not on an earlier day. So time itself is created before our sense of time and our measurement of time becomes something which is measured by the celestial objects which we see in the sky. Now, the question, of course, since this is, as we're all familiar with, so the halachic time is very much bound up with the observation of these celestial objects. If you have Shabbat beginning and at Friday night with the sun setting on Friday night and ending with the sun setting again, Tzeit HaKochavim, on Motzei Shabbat, our daily tefillot, the concept of whether it's Kriyat Shema, of B'shoch B'chav Kumecha, perhaps we can, the way it's understood, meaning daytime and nighttime, the korbanot and the avodah in the Beit HaMikdash, by extension, all of our tefillot, mitzvot, which are dependent on either, that need to be accomplished either during the day or during the night, specific seasons, etc. All of these things are based on the celestial objects in the sky, whether it's determined by the sun or determined by the moon when it comes to question of determining dates of the month. Having said that, so that leads us to a question which is already dealt with by the Rishonim. Interestingly, I'm not familiar with at least a direct discussion which precedes the Rishonim on this question in terms of perhaps certain hints to it, which we'll get to, but that are found in the Gemara or the Mishnah or other works of Chazal. But here we'll just take as an example source number 5 on the bottom of the first sheet. So so here the Radvaz, who is writing in the 16th century in this area of the world, in the Eastern Mediterranean, different places, Turkey, Egypt, etc. So the Radvaz writes the following: Sha'alta mimeni odiacha da'ati b'inyan haShabbat ki yesh chiluk gadol ben hashochnim b'mizrach leshochnim b'ma'arav v'nimtza shema shehu le'elu Shabbat havu le'elu chol. So the notion of time zones themselves that we're familiar with, and the breaking up of the world into longitudinal lines and the like, that's a much later invention. The longitude already had been invented by the time of the Radbaz, but sense of time zones is something that only started in the 19th century with the invention of the train system, where you needed to know exactly what time it was in distant locales. Until that point, it didn't really matter what the exact time was if you were far away, because by the time you reached that place, that was the time, right? They set their clocks based on the observation at any given place, but still, people were well aware that that there were different times in different places simultaneously. And his question is just a very basic question. If you think about it, Shabbat, it does not last. If I were to ask the question and say, how long is Shabbat? And people would answer, it's 24 hours, 25 hours, whatever you want to say. That's not really true. It's really 48 hours. It's beginning at the easternmost point of the day, wherever that time zone, wherever the international date line is, the easternmost point of that day. And international date lines is another conversation. I'm not going to get to it today, but let's say somewhere in the Pacific, that's where the day now begins. Okay, and it will only end when Shabbat is finished at the westernmost point. So let's say just on the opposite side of the international date line. So that really, Shabbat on a global perspective, didn't last for 24 hours. It lasted for about 48 hours. And that's his question. How is that possible? Hello? Do you hear me? Okay. I have a feeling that my
כן, רב יהודה?
please feel free to send them to me. I'll be happy to answer. And looking forward to seeing all of you again in person.